Welcome to The Bitter Witness.
Don't be scared.
Hello, welcome back. I hope you've had a good week. I am exhausted. My play has ended its very successful run, and I am trying to get things back to normal around here. That was one of the hardest productions I have ever done or will ever do. But the accolades and wonderful performances and family that we made it all worth it. So I've dug out the mic, and I'm going to try to get back to a weekly schedule for you. It's hard to do all this research and record and edit all by myself sometimes, but I really do love it. And since I haven't been able to find a job anywhere else, I've decided to throw myself into this podcast and see what we can make of this together. Apparently no one wants a criminologist on staff. Who knew? Speaking of the business, if you enjoy this episode or any of my episodes, head on over to the Patreon page and show the show some support. For less than what one of your Starbucks morning coffees cost, you can help make the show all the better. You can also support the show on Spotify by subscribing, and don't forget to like and share the show and give it a 5-star review on Apple. Well, that's enough of the business. Let's get into this week's case. The dogs are sleeping behind me, so Puppy ASMR will be brought to you by both Piper and Miley today. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, and relax while I tell you about the case of Amy Bishop, the University of Alabama school shooter. As always, I want to give the victims in this case top billing. And sadly, as in many of our cases, there are numerous victims. So to anyone who has been harmed in any way by this case, and to their families and friends, I acknowledge you, and I send my love to you, wherever you may be. Being a parent isn't easy. And the unimaginable pain of losing a child is compounded when that loss comes at the hands of a sibling. In such a harrowing scenario, the choices that a grieving parent faces become agonizingly complex. One can either continue to nurture the child who remains, perhaps out of a desperate instinct to cling to the last remnant of their family, or they may choose to shun the offending child, seeking to morally distance themselves from an act that defies comprehension. The emotional turmoil of mourning the lost child while grappling with the reality of their siblings' actions creates an unending cycle of grief, guilt, and confusion that few outside such a tragedy could begin to fathom. The consequences of decisions made by parents in this situation are monumental, echoing long after the immediate crisis has passed. Parents find themselves wrestling with the notion of a duty to love and protect the child who remains, a love that is now forever intertwined with the horror of what they have done. Yet protecting that child can also feel like a betrayal to the memory of the one lost. It's a precarious balance between heroic love and complicity. The parental instinct to shield a child, even one who has committed an unspeakable act, can sometimes overshadow the imperative to confront and acknowledge the underlying issues that led to such a tragedy. The case of Amy Bishop is a chilling reminder of the potentially devastating consequences that can arise from parental complicity. Amy Bishop was born April 24, 1965, to Samuel Bishop, a professor in the art department of Northeastern University, and Judy Bishop, who was active in local politics as a member of Braintree's town meeting governing board. Sam was born Sam Papazoglos. I hope I said that right, Sam. He was raised by his two Greek immigrant parents in Somerville. Sam joined the Air Force in 1954 and soon after changed his last name to Bishop. Judy was born Judy Sanborn and was from an old New England family. Judy was known for telling folks that she had chased Sam until he had caught her. They were a cute opposite couple. Judy was described as boisterous with a great sense of humor, and Sam is described as quiet, intelligent, and reserved. They made a perfect couple. The Bishops created their home in Massachusetts, and their home would be considered upper middle class. Amy had a brother, Seth, who was 3 years her junior. Both her parents were well educated, and Amy followed in her father's footsteps, heading into academia. Amy received her undergraduate degree at Northeastern University in Boston, where her father was a professor, and then she went on to Harvard and received her PhD in genetics. So she's a smart cookie. Well, at least book smart. The Bishop family lived at 46 Hollis Avenue in Braintree, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. Inside the family home, we have Sam, the father, Judy, the mother, and the two children, Amy and Seth. Amy was described as an asthmatic child who spent countless hours in an emergency room because of the disease. And this is where Amy's love of science developed. As a child, she vowed to find a cure for asthma. According to the reports I found, Amy and Seth were very close growing up, and Amy was known for doting on her little brother. Seth was described as a shy kid, but he would sit and talk with you for hours. His best friend, Paul Agnew, stated in The New Yorker that Seth liked to find out how things worked and loved to explore. Agnew stated that he and Seth became friends out of a shared love of trains. The two boys would slip under the fence at a rail yard so they could get a good up-close look at the enormous locomotive engines that sat inside. Seth was known to explore for miles outside of Braintree on his bike. He would take a pencil and a map and set off trying to map a new adventure for himself. Judy stated that she would be driving home and miles outside of Braintree, she would see a boy on a bike, and as she got closer, she would realize it was Seth out exploring new routes. In 1985, Sam's father passed away, and the Bishop family attended the wake. When the family returned, they opened the door to their home, only to realize that they had been broken into and robbed. Judy's wedding rings were gone, as well as many valuables and sentimental items from the kids' childhood were also taken. The entire family was devastated. Judy wrote a letter to the paper to be published, pleading with the burglars to please return the sentimental items from the kids' childhoods. But Sam took it a little harder. He went to a nearby town and bought a 12-gauge shotgun. Judy and Amy, who was 20 at the time, did not agree with keeping a shotgun in the house, but Sam was resolute in his decision to protect his family and belongings. He kept the shotgun beside the bed empty, and a box of shells on the nightstand also next to the bed. On December 6, 1986, just after 2 p.m., Braintree police received a 911 call from an absolutely hysterical Judy. When police arrived at the family's home, they found a distraught Judy standing in the front doorway, her clothing splattered in blood, and Seth on the floor in the kitchen, shot in the chest by a 12-gauge shotgun. Judy informed the police on the scene that Seth had just returned home from the grocery store and she from the stables. They were both in the kitchen. Amy had come into the kitchen carrying Sam's shotgun and stated, "I have a bullet in the gun and I don't know how to get it out." Judy told Amy, "Don't point that at anyone." Judy stated that Amy was then turning the gun to hand it to her brother to take the bullet out when the gun went off, shooting Seth at close range. Judy said it was an accident. police asked where Amy was. Judy told them that when Seth fell to the floor, Amy fled out of the house. As Amy was fleeing out of the house after shooting her brother, the shotgun went off again, blasting a large hole in the ceiling. Once outside on the street, Amy pointed the shotgun at a car passing by. When the car stopped, Amy tried to get into the car in an attempt to escape, but she was unsuccessful in gaining control of the car, so she kept running. Police put a "Be on the lookout" for Amy Bishop, and she was shortly found and taken into custody outside a car dealership where she had been trying to steal a car to escape. When questioned, Amy told the police that her mother had gone to the stables that morning and her father and brother had both left the house, which left her all alone. She stated that she was scared the robbers would come back while she was alone in the house, so she decided to get her father's shotgun, load it, and wait for either the robbers or someone in her family to come home. While she was waiting, she accidentally shot a hole in the ceiling of her bedroom, which scared her, and when she heard her brother come home from the grocery store, she decided to ask him to help her unload it, and that is when the gun went off, accidentally shooting her brother in the chest. Meanwhile, emergency crews rushed Seth to the hospital. When Sam returned to the house, he saw police lights everywhere. Once he found out what had happened, he raced to the hospital. He arrived at the hospital at 3:08 p.m., just as Seth was being pronounced dead. Seth Bishop was 18. Sam stood to the side as the gurney carrying his son's dead body was pushed past him. Later, Sam stated, "They kept saying he was dead, but he didn't seem dead to me. He looked up at me." Police at the station were unable to get much more information out of Amy Bishop due to the somewhat hysterical state that she was in. They released Amy into the custody of her parents once Sam and Judy arrived at the station after Seth had been declared dead. Within the police report, it was written that Amy was released to her parents with further investigation to follow. One police officer testified that when Amy was reunited with her mother, they embraced. Mrs. Bishop then stated that, quote, "She had lost her son today, and she didn't want to lose her daughter," unquote. The devastated family returned to their home. While they had been gone, neighbors had converged on the house after police had left to clean the blood from the kitchen, hoping to alleviate at least that horrible task from them. Sam, Judy, and Amy entered the house. Amy went upstairs and headed into her parents' room and climbed into their bed. Sam went to his study and closed the door, and Judy went to the kitchen. Hundreds of people attended Seth's wake, held at the Church of All Souls. Seth was laid out in an open casket, and according to those that were there, Sam and Judy clung to Amy through the entire service. Amy was described as catatonic. A friend of Amy's, Kathleen Oldham, stated, "Amy looked like a zombie." On March 30th, 1987, the district attorney's office concluded that Seth's death was the result of the accidental discharge of a firearm, and no formal charges would be brought against anyone from the Bishop home. After the funeral for Seth, Amy removed herself from life, literally. She stayed inside the house, and at night she would sleep in her parents' bed with them. Friends would come by the house and try to get Amy to come out, but it took enormous amounts of coaxing to get her to leave the safety of the house. Sam and Judy made a conscious decision not to move from the home and left Seth's room exactly as it had been the day he died. My guess would be that they most likely felt as though they would be leaving Seth behind if they left the house. But for Amy, eating inside the kitchen where she killed her brother and walking past his bedroom frozen in time only added to her trauma, making her isolate herself more. Sam didn't believe in psychiatry, and this was the 80s, so any therapy for Amy was out of the question. In the New Yorker article, Amy stated that she didn't want to confront what had happened. She didn't want to explore feeling terrible. So she decided to just try and get over it on her own. Let's just stop here for a second. Amy Bishop was 21 when she killed her brother, an adult. So this behavior of sleeping with her parents, not seeking therapy because her dad didn't believe in it, just exemplifies what happens when parents are unwilling to address the underlying issues. It incites a dangerous kind of parental blindness. By avoiding confrontation, they created an environment conducive to denial. This illustrates the balance between what might be deemed as love, that is, protecting and accepting one's child despite their actions, and the unwillingness to confront difficult truths. And as we shall see, consequences of this blindness are often dire. Amy finally returned to school at Northeastern and threw herself into her studies. She would go to class and then head to her father's office and sit and wait for him to be finished, and then she would ride home with him. Sam told Amy that in order for her to get over her grief of taking a life, the best thing would be for her to create a new life. Wow. That is some excellent fucking parenting right there, my friends. You just killed your brother, but hey, know what? If you want to get over that quickly, just go get knocked up. That'll solve everything. Jesus. I'm sure that by ignoring all the feelings and emotions you have and dropping yourself into baby chaos, everything will be good and that suppressed trauma will never resurface. Boy. Eventually, Amy started venturing out from the family home and started to engage in life again. Amy met a student at Northeastern University named Jim Anderson. The two met at a campus group meeting for those who played Dungeons and Dragons. No, this isn't a satanic panic story. I promise. The two hit it off and began dating. In 1989, the two married in the same church where Seth's funeral had been held. I just don't think I could have done that. I wouldn't want to be married in the same church where my brother's funeral was if I had shot him in the chest. But to each their own. I guess suppressed trauma can make you do weird things, maybe. In 1991, Amy gave birth to the couple's first of 4 children, a daughter, Lily. The couple were blessed with 2 more daughters, Thea and Phaedra. And in 2001, Amy and Jim welcomed their last child, a son, who Amy named Seth after her brother. Seth Jr. was born on what would have been Seth Sr.'s 33rd birthday. Okay, I have to stop because that is weird. That's like really weird. I mean, number one, I understand why she named her son Seth to honor her brother, who she killed. But for that Seth to be born on the other Seth's birthday? You know, shit like this happens all the time. It happens in my family too. My son, my oldest son, is born on my birthday, and I'm the oldest out of my siblings. My middle brother, who coincidentally his name is Seth, his second child is born on his birthday. Right? I'm telling you, there's something beyond this world and they send shit our way like this. What are the odds? Well, 1 in 365. I know. But that freaked me out because I'm like, ooh, Seth Sr., the dead Seth, maybe that's his spirit being reincarnated into the baby Seth. Okay, moving on. Amy was described as a high-strung mother to her children, but loving. She would only allow her mother, Judy, to watch the children while Amy was finishing up all her degrees. And only organic food was on the menu for those kiddies. In 1993, Jim and Amy became suspects in a 1993 letter bomb case. Paul Rosenberg, a Harvard Medical School professor and physician at Children's Hospital Boston, received a package containing 2 pipe bombs that failed to explode. Rosenberg was Amy Bishop's supervisor at the Children's Hospital Neurobiology Lab. Amy had been concerned about receiving a negative evaluation from Rosenberg and reportedly had been in a dispute with him. Amy resigned from her position at the hospital because Rosenberg felt she, quote, could not meet the standards required for the work, unquote. According to documents based upon witness interviews, Bishop was reportedly upset and on the verge of a nervous breakdown as a result of Rosenberg's comments. Jim apparently told a friend that he wanted to shoot, stab, or strangle Rosenberg prior to the pipe bombs arriving at his home. Later, Jim would deny this, stating that he had never threatened Rosenberg. He stated, I wouldn't know the guy if he walked into a bar. I don't actually think that's the quote, Jim, but we get what you're trying to say. According to the reports that I found, the investigation focused on Amy and Jim, but closed without any charges filed due to lack of evidence. And this part blew my mind. This lack of evidence was mainly due to the fact that Jim and Amy refused to cooperate with investigators, refusing to open their door to searches of their home or take polygraph tests. So apparently in 1993, when a suspect says no thanks to a polygraph or interviews or searches of their home, the police just say, okay, well, we gave it our best shot. Case closed, unsolved. Wow. Later on in the 90s, Amy became an instructor of medicine at Harvard Medical School for a time. And during this time, she and her husband Jim created something called a portable cell incubator. The two had entered a competition for technological inventions, and they came in third, which gave them a prize of $25,000. So Jim and Amy are like big-time smarty pants. One Saturday morning in 2002, Amy, Jim, and the children went for breakfast at an IHOP in Peabody. I just want to say that we don't have IHOPs here in Canada, and I really, really wish we did. And if we do, I don't know where they are. They're probably near Toronto, which is a place I try and avoid at all costs. But I want an IHOP. IHOP, if you're listening, you can sponsor me. Send me an email. Moving on. Sorry. So, Saturday morning in 2002, the family goes for breakfast at an IHOP in Peabody, Massachusetts. Amy requested a booster seat for her 1-year-old son, Seth, and the waitress told them that the last booster seat had just been given to another party. Amy protested, "But we were here first." She then marched over to the woman who was just sitting down to breakfast with her own kids and launched into a huge tirade with all the nasty curse words you can think of. "I am Dr. Amy Bishop," she shrieked repeatedly, according to the police report. A manager then asked Amy to leave the restaurant, and she complied. But on her way out of the restaurant, Amy beelined back over to the woman who took the last booster seat and punched her in the head. Amy was arrested, but the charges against her were dropped and never appeared on her permanent record. Now, some have said that at the time that this incident occurred, Amy was in the middle of her postdoctoral research and also had 4 babies. The stress alone of these 2 items is insane. It's probably at a level that most of us could never comprehend. But factor in that she was a woman in academia, and the stress levels will reach astronomical proportions, which even today causes a great deal of stress, as academia has historically and still is a boys' club. Women often have to choose between having their family or advancing their careers. There are some women, like myself, who wait until their children are old enough to take care of themselves before pursuing their higher education. It's not an easy choice to make, and the ones who try to do both at the same time, my hat's off to you, because it's a very steeply inclined road to traverse. With that, I'm not condoning Amy punching a woman in the head over a booster seat in an IHOP, but I also won't say that there haven't been a few times in my life when I didn't want to punch another mother in the head for something that was petty and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And if you're a mother, you know. There is a saying in academia, publish or die, and it is very true. If you are not conducting research continually and having your articles published, you will never survive the cutthroat world of academia. But between 1994 and 1998, from what I could see, Amy seemed to be doing all right. She had been published about 4 times within those 4 years, so 1 project a year, which isn't spectacular for publishing articles, but I would say it's maybe enough to keep her head above water. In 2003, Amy joined the faculty of the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, Alabama. She was an assistant professor there, which means that she is an employee of the university, but does not have tenure. And in academia, tenure is the gold crown at the end of the research rainbow. Once you have tenure, you are set for life. Amy had made a bid for tenure during the winter semester of 2009 to 2010 at the University of Alabama, but it had been denied, meaning that Amy would be out of a job come the end of the semester, and she was not happy about it. The main way to get tenure at a university is to publish research paper after research paper after research paper. It is to get your name on as many articles as you possibly can, which means you need to involve yourself in numerous research projects. And Amy had been doing that, but there were a couple of Amy's articles that were in question as to whether or not they would count towards her tenure. I don't remember what the timeline is or how many articles you need to publish for tenure, but I will tell you, it is a lot, and it is ridiculously stressful. One side note of interesting information about Amy Bishop, she is the second cousin of John Irving. Now, for those of you who don't know who he is a famous novelist, and he has written some of my all-time favorite novels. The World According to Garp, The Cider House Rules, A Prayer for Owen Meany, which I actually think I still have my original copy somewhere inside this house. The Cider House Rules, The World According to Garp were made into movies, and the movie Simon Birch was partially based on A Prayer for Owen Meany. I tell you this for 2 reasons. The first is that John Irving is one of my favorite authors, and I can't help but gush and fangirl over him. And the second is because, like her second cousin, Amy Bishop considered herself somewhat of a fiction novelist. She belonged to several writing groups wherever she was living, and according to friends, she had completed 3 novels, but none of them were published. Ironically, or strangely enough, one of her books was about a female scientist who was working to defeat a potential pandemic virus, and while conducting that work, the scientist was battling suicidal thoughts because she didn't think she was going to get awarded tenure. According to a friend of Amy's, Amy saw writing novels as her ticket out of academia. Apparently, she had a literary agent, but still nothing had been published. Another friend stated that Amy seemed entitled when interacting with other writers in her writing groups. She would often throw out the fact that she was related to John Irving and that she held a degree from Harvard in an attempt to gain clout or popularity amongst other writers. It never worked. Multiple colleagues of Bishop's at the university had expressed concern to the dean over her behavior. Amongst the reports to the dean, she had been described as interrupting meetings with bizarre tangents, left field kind of stuff, being strange, crazy, did things that weren't normal, and that she was out of touch with reality. I couldn't find any specific examples of what they were talking about, but I did find that the one professor in her department who described her as crazy in one of his complaints, he had done this during one of the tenure committee meetings discussing Amy Bishop's possible tenure, and Bishop found out about this remark and filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, stating that gender discrimination had been used against her. She presented the professor's statement of her being crazy of evidence of that in her trial. Okay, I guess you could stretch that one out maybe to be equal employment opportunity issue, but I think that's a big stretch. I personally probably would have gone down a harassment alley with that comment. Either way, the commission that reviewed the case gave the professor who said, quote, crazy, the opportunity to redact his claim against Bishop or to publicly state that it was a simple, flippant remark made in error. But, and I love this, the professor refused to change his opinion of Amy Bishop. He stated that, quote, I said she was crazy multiple times, and I stand by that. This woman has a pattern of erratic behavior. She has done things that aren't normal. She is out of touch with reality, unquote. Hey, you know what? I give it to him. Most people would have said, yeah, it was a flippant remark, but not this guy. I don't know who the exact professor was, but my hat's off to you, sir. In 2009, several students at the University of Alabama complained to the administrators about Amy Bishop on at least 3 different occasions, saying she was ineffective in the classroom and had odd, unsettling ways about her. A petition was signed by dozens of students, which was then sent to the department head. The complaints, however, sadly, did not result in any classroom changes. Man, administrators need to listen to students. It's so bad. If they're telling you that a professor is ineffective and there's something funky going on in the classroom, you need to look into it. I had so many professors that I would just sit there and go, what the hell is wrong with you? Sorry, I was just reliving some past trauma. I'm back. On February 12th, 2010, the Faculty of Science at the University of Alabama sat down to a 3 o'clock meeting. In total, 13 professors and staff from the faculty were around the table inside a third-floor conference room in the Shelby Center for Science and Technology. Gopi Podila, I really hope I say that right, and I apologize to his family if I didn't. Gopi Podila, a plant biologist and chair of the department, distributed the agenda for the meeting. Gopi sat and began the meeting. The meeting was discussing the department's plans for the upcoming semester, and a usually vocal neurobiologist, Amy Bishop, sat sullen in the chair next to Gopi. In fact, one could describe her as brooding. A colleague and friend of Bishop's, Deborah Moriarty, great name, sat across from her in the meeting and noticed that Bishop wasn't as vocal as she normally was, and Moriarty knew why. Bishop, at this point, had been denied tenure and had been told that at the end of the current semester she would be out of her job at the university. Moriarty stated that she had thought to herself she needed to grab Bishop after the meeting and see how her job search was going. Moriarty was a little concerned about Bishop, as the last conversation they had had, Bishop had told her that the denial of tenure meant her life was over. Moriarty stated that she had tried to encourage her friend by telling her that things would be okay and that there would be a department at some university where Amy would fit in and would get tenure. But the friendship between Moriarty and Bishop had cooled after the department had voted against the offer of tenure for Bishop. The biggest reason being that Moriarty had voted against giving Bishop tenure, and Amy Bishop knew that. As the meeting was nearing the end, Bishop stood from her chair in front of the door and pulled a 9mm handgun out of her purse, pointed the gun at Gopi Podila's head, and pulled the trigger. A stunned group of professors and staff couldn't comprehend what they had just witnessed. Bishop turned the gun towards a department assistant, Stephanie Montecchiolo, and fired again, hitting Stephanie as she was trying to dive under the table for some ounce of protection. Bishop turned the gun and fired again. The sound was absolutely deafening inside the tiny conference room with no windows. This time, she shot Adriel Johnson. Adriel was a biologist and faculty member at the university. His research focused on cell biology and nutritional physiology. The professors and staff inside the conference room were screaming and diving for the floor, attempting to move towards the door for escape. But Bishop had strategically placed herself in the chair located directly in front of the door for the meeting. And now, standing there with her gun, she was blocking the only exit out of the unfolding hell around them. Bishop aimed the gun and fired, this time shooting Maria Ragland Davis. Maria was an associate professor of biology at the University of Alabama. She studied molecular biology and plant genetics. Deborah Moriarty was on the floor and still wasn't exactly sure what was happening. She began to crawl under the table towards Bishop. Deborah reached Bishop's feet and threw her arms around Bishop's legs. Bishop looked down and Deborah screamed up, "Amy, don't do this. Think of my daughter. Think of my grandson." But as Deborah was pleading with Bishop, Bishop turned the gun towards Deborah and pulled the trigger. Click. No bullet. Bishop pulled the trigger again. Click. Again, no bullet. Bishop's gun had jammed. Deborah seized the miracle and let go of Bishop's legs, and as fast as she could, crawled past Bishop and out into the hallway. The entire time that Deborah was scampering out of the conference room into the hall, Bishop was right behind her, continually pulling the trigger with the gun aimed directly at Deborah's head. Click, Click, click. Bishop finally stopped pulling the trigger and began attempting to fix the gun. Deborah took the tiny window of opportunity and moved her body as fast as she could back into the conference room. As soon as Deborah crossed the threshold, another professor slammed and barricaded the door shut. The entire attack had lasted less than a minute. Bishop stood out in the hall, staring at the door to the conference room for a few seconds, then spun on her heel and walked down one floor and entered a ladies' washroom. Once inside, she washed the splatters of blood off of her gun, removed her blood-soaked blazer, and stuffed them both inside the garbage can. Bishop then exited the ladies' washroom and casually walked to a science lab in the same hallway. She entered the lab and approached a student working at one of the stations. "May I use your cell phone, please? I need to call my husband." The student, a little confused, handed Bishop their cell phone. Bishop dialed the number of her husband and said, "I'm done," which was the couple's usual message indicating that it was time for James to come and pick Bishop up from work. Bishop handed the cell phone back to the student, thanked them, and exited the lab. Bishop then made her way down to a loading dock in the back of the Shelby Center and exited the building. Upon exiting the loading dock, a sheriff's deputy was there with gun drawn. They took Bishop into custody without incident. Thankfully, only a few students were in the building at the time of the shooting, and none were harmed. When the officers were putting her in the cruiser after being cuffed, Amy stated, "It didn't happen. They're still alive." Back in the conference room, Gopi Podilla, chairman of the biology department, was deceased, along with Maria Ragland Davis and Adriel Johnson Sr., both associate professors of biology. Wounded in the attack were Louis Rogelio Cruz Vera, Joseph Leahy, and Stephanie Montecchiolo. Bishop was suspended without pay retroactively on the day of the attack, and later, in a one-paragraph letter dated February 26, 2010, she was fired. Bishop received a letter of termination from Jack Fix, Dean of the College of Sciences, which did not state a reason for doing so. Her termination was effective February 12th, the day of the shooting. The morning after the shooting at the university, the Huntsville Sheriff's Office received a call from Police Chief Paul Frazier of Braintree, the town where Bishop had grown up. He stated, "The woman you have in custody, I thought you'd want to know, shot and killed her brother back in 1986. Prosecutors began building a case against Amy Bishop for murder and attempted murder. But there was a small complication in the case. Several of the people that Amy Bishop shot that day in that conference room had actually voted for giving her tenure. The prosecutors couldn't explain her mass shooting as simply an act of vengeance. Amy stated in an interview after the shooting at the university that after she had killed Seth, she began hearing voices. She stated that sometimes the voices were scary and sometimes they weren't. But she also stated that for the few months prior to the shooting at the university, she had been hallucinating. Can you say trying to set an insanity defense here? Judy, Amy's mother, stated that Amy hearing voices was absolutely not true. But in the same breath, she also added that if such a thing were true, Amy probably wouldn't tell her father or me. So, thanks for nothing? Amy's trial was scheduled for September 24th, 2012. But 2 weeks before that date, Amy's lawyer approached the prosecution about the possibility of a deal. Amy was willing to plead guilty to capital murder in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table. She would spend the rest of her life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her lawyer stated that if they went to trial, there would have been a 1% chance that they could have convinced a jury that Bishop was not guilty by reason of insanity. He also said that a battery of psychiatric tests that had been conducted on Amy Bishop had proved inconclusive. So the defense had no satisfying evidence that Amy Bishop was insane. The prosecutors contacted the 9 survivors of the shooting and the families of the murdered victims, and not one of them wanted to see the death penalty carried out. They didn't believe that a life for a life would bring back their loved ones or remove the pain from their injuries. And so, the prosecutors agreed to the deal. When a defendant pleads guilty in a capital murder case in Alabama, the state must present an abbreviated version of its evidence in court. And Amy sat quietly, clasping and unclasping her hands while the prosecution described her crimes. As photographs of her slaughtered colleagues were projected, she buried her head in her arms like a school child, her dark hair spilling onto the table. When the judge asked Amy if she agreed to plead guilty and waive any right to appeal, she spoke the only word she ever said inside a courtroom: yes. Amy Bishop was then sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 1 count of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. After Amy's guilty plea for the attack at the University of Alabama, the district attorney's office in Braintree, Massachusetts, decided that they would reopen the case of Seth Bishop's murder. They wanted to extradite Amy Bishop from Alabama up to Massachusetts for her to face charges of murdering her brother. However, a few days after they had announced they were reopening the case, the district attorney's office from Braintree announced that it would not seek extradition because Massachusetts does not have the death penalty, and given that Amy was serving a life without parole sentence in Alabama, the district attorney stated, "The penalty we would seek is already in place." But then Amy announced through her lawyer that she wanted to be tried for Seth's death. She had always insisted that the shooting was an accident, and she appeared to resent the implication of the withdrawn indictment. According to her lawyer, she wanted to use the trial to help demonstrate that she was innocent of killing her brother on purpose. She wanted to prove that it was an accident. Quote, "I want the truth to come out. I want that for me, for my parents, and for closure," unquote. What? I would say she's absolutely insane, but I really don't think she is. I think she's a highly intelligent, calculating, cold-blooded killer. They say they're not going to prosecute you, but you say, no, hey, wait, I want to prove I'm innocent, so prosecute me? Okay. There are those who still believe that there had been a cover-up regarding Seth's death, but most of them believe that it was an act of compassion, not a conspiracy. They feel that the police force at the time in Braintree, and with Judy, her mother, having the connections that she did, that law enforcement officials took compassion on Judy and her family. But then I was doing some digging, and I found this report. In the 80s, Judy Bishop had a close friend named Sarah Gillies, a local woman who was also active in Braintree politics. On the day that Seth was shot, Gillies was planning to go to Judy's house for tea, but Judy had called her and canceled it. According to Gillies, Judy had told her, "There's been a terrible fight here. It's bad. Sam has gone off in a huff." Shortly after that phone call, Gillies learned that Seth Bishop had been shot. When they were thinking about charging Amy Bishop in 2012 for Seth's death, they had an inquest. And at that inquest, a firearms expert who had examined the 12-gauge shotgun that Amy had used to kill Seth testified that it would normally take 5 pounds of pressure on the trigger in order to fire the gun. He was asked, quote, "You're saying the only way it could have gone off accidentally, even if her finger was on the trigger, was if someone was actually pulling it or trying to pull the gun out of her hands?" Unquote. The firearms expert's response? Quote unquote, yeah. Because of those two pieces of information, there are some who believe that Amy and Sam, her father, had gotten into a knockdown, drag-out fight that morning. And after her father had stormed out of the house, Amy had been trying to prepare to kill him when he returned up in her bedroom. And that is where one of the shots went through the ceiling. Then, when Amy heard Seth return from the grocery store, she mistakenly thought it was Sam, her father, and headed downstairs in a blind rage to kill him. Some believe that she and Seth got into a pull and tug over the gun, and Amy pulled the trigger, killing Seth, which caused her to snap out of her rage and realize the mistake of killing her brother, not her father. And then she ran off with the gun, accidentally firing the gun one more time into the ceiling of the downstairs of the Bishop home. It might have been a simple accident. I don't know. There is evidence of both. But I will tell you that if it was accidental, the next bit of information that I found is just awful. On April 18th, 2021, Amy Bishop's 20-year-old son, Seth Anderson, named for her late brother Seth, was fatally shot in an incident in Huntsville. The shooter was charged with manslaughter. A grand jury indicted Vincent Harmon on a manslaughter charge, alleging that he recklessly caused Seth Anderson's death. The shooting happened in a vehicle as a group of friends hung out together that night. Police arrested Harmon, alleging he handled the gun recklessly and accidentally killed his friend. Today, Amy Bishop sits in the Tutwiler Prison for Women in Alabama. A simple search pulls up her photo and stats, as well as her sentence and time served. As of this recording, she has served 14 years, 9 months, and 22 days, and her total term is listed as 999 years, 99 months, and 99 days. And that, my friends, is the case of Amy Bishop, the University of Alabama school shooter. My thoughts. A female school shooter is an anomaly. Even though Bishop was a faculty member, this was technically a school shooting. Men are typically more violent and therefore tend to commit the majority of mass shootings or school shootings. Some say it is because of an evolutionary factor, whereby the woman is more empathetic to others and the man more aggressive. Some say it is because of psychosociological factors, whereby a man in distress is less likely to turn to others to help him deal with his emotions or issues. One of the main reasons why we don't know why women commit mass shootings or school shootings is simple. There aren't enough female shooters to create a strong enough sample to study. I wrote my master's thesis on the research surrounding school shootings, and one thing I determined from my research was that each case has unique circumstances within the reasoning or motive, if you will, behind the shooting. When we look at Amy Bishop's case, it is clear to see that her parents' complicity and desperate need to save one of their children directly impacted Bishop's ability to properly process her emotions. As well, the world of academia is ruthless. I've been there, and some of the things I have seen and heard would crush even the most mentally sound person on the planet. Academia is devoid of emotions, and there is no place for them anywhere. Common phrases that I heard during my research: don't take it personally, just write. Just get it published. It's just words. But as someone who spent almost 3 years writing one thesis, when someone shreds the work, your work, that you have put hundreds of hours into and countless late nights writing and rewriting, I can tell you that it is not an easy thing to separate your personal pride from your work. I also think that there were and are serious mental health issues that were never addressed. I think that both of these factors played a role in causing Amy Bishop to act out like a spoiled child who didn't get their way and attack everyone in her department meeting. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and even a bit into the 90s, no one, and I mean no one, was talking about mental health. You just sucked it up and went on with your day. Suppress your emotions, squash what you're feeling, and do things the way they're supposed to be done. That was pretty much the mantra of every father from those times. Bishop killed her brother, and nothing happened. She punched a woman in the head over a booster seat in a restaurant, and nothing happened. She most likely sent 2 pipe bombs to a colleague, and nothing happened. She killed 3 colleagues and wounded 3 others because she believed that nothing would happen. And a lot of Amy's belief that nothing would happen stemmed from her parents' complicity by not having the tough discussions, by not finding her therapy when she really needed it. I'm really gray on the death penalty, and I think the decision to take a life should be decided on a case-by-case basis. But I can't say that there isn't a little part of me that wishes that those prosecutors hadn't taken the death penalty off the table for Amy Bishop. But for now, until she takes her last breath, Amy Bishop sits inside a cell, alone and alive. Unlike her brothers Seth, Gopi Podilla, Maria Ragland Davis, and Adriel D. Johnson Sr. Whew, that was a rough case. Female mass shooters have always fascinated me. I would love to do a research study on them sometime. And with that, I think we'll leave it there. I hope you have a good week. Stay safe, get your pap test done, and enjoy your day today. This has been a Bitter Witness production.